You don't really understand time until you sit in a room where the clock barely moves. That's something I learned after spending 2 months in a nursing home. At 77, I thought I had a good grasp of what it meant to be patient, to wait, to endure. But I was wrong. You don't know waiting until you wake up every day with nowhere urgent to go, no real obligations to meet. And yet, somehow, the days still slip through your fingers like sand. When you're young, time feels like something you can control. You plan your days, chase your ambitions, and fill your hours with movement. But here's something most people don't realize until much later in life. Time doesn't belong to you. It moves at its own pace, whether you're ready for it or not. And in a place like a nursing home, you feel that truth in your bones. Before we get further, I'd like to know where you're joining us from. And if you find any value in these kinds of reflections, a simple like and subscribe would mean a lot. Not for numbers, not for the algorithm, but because these conversations matter. Because wisdom, if not shared, disappears. The first thing I learned in these past 2 months is that life, in the end, is not about what you own or what you've achieved. It's about the people who remember your name when you're not in the room. I've met people here who once held high positions, built businesses, traveled the world, yet today they sit alone, their stories gathering dust. No one calls, no one visits. And it makes you wonder, what was it all for? You spend your life thinking the next big milestone is what matters, the next job, the next house, the next move. But one day, you realize that the only thing you truly own in this world is the space you occupy in other people's hearts. If you neglect your relationships in favor of success, don't be surprised when success leaves you with no one to share it with. And then, there's the silence. You don't know real silence until you've sat in a place where no one has anything left to prove. In the outside world, people fill every moment with noise, talking, texting, scrolling, doing whatever it takes to avoid being alone with their own thoughts. But in here, you sit with yourself, whether you like it or not. You think about the things you should have said, the people you should have held on to a little longer, the arguments you shouldn't have let pride win. It's funny how the things that seemed so important at the time become meaningless when you reach this stage of life. That grudge you held for years, it feels silly now. That missed opportunity you beat yourself up over, it doesn't matter anymore. But the time you wasted being too stubborn to apologize or too busy to check in on an old friend, that still stings. Because those are the things you can't get back. Another thing I've realized is that aging humbles you in ways you never expected. When you're young, you take things for granted. Walking without pain, eating without assistance, even something as simple as getting dressed in the morning. You don't think twice about it. But then, one day, your body decides it has its own plans. You try to stand up, and your knees remind you of every step you ever took. You reach for a button, and your fingers struggle to cooperate. And just like that, you understand. Independence is not a guarantee. I used to pride myself on doing things myself, never asking for help, never admitting when something was too difficult. But now, I see that independence is not about doing everything alone. It's about knowing when to accept help with grace. It's about allowing others to show up for you the way you once showed up for them. And that's not weakness. It's wisdom. The hardest lesson I've learned here, though, is that not everyone gets the same ending. Some people live their final years surrounded by love, laughter, and familiar voices. Others spend them in quiet solitude, watching the door, hoping someone remembers they exist. And the truth is, we don't always get to choose which path we end up on. But we do get to choose how we show up for others while we still can. I've met people here who are kind despite everything they've lost. People who smile even when their hearts are heavy. And I've met others who carry bitterness like a burden they refuse to put down. If I've learned anything, it's that happiness isn't about what you have. It's about what you hold on to. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is let go. 2 months in a nursing home has taught me more about life than years of living ever did. And if there's one thing I can leave you with, it's this. Don't wait until it's too late to appreciate what really matters. Because one day, you'll look back, and the only question that will matter is, did I love well? It's strange how the world outside keeps moving, while your own life seems to slow down. You don't really notice it at first, but after a while, you realize you've become a spectator. The cars outside keep rushing by. The news keeps cycling through the same stories. People are still running late, making plans, chasing goals. But inside these walls, time moves differently. It's quieter, more reflective, and in that stillness, you start to see things more clearly. One of the biggest realizations I've had is that we spend most of our lives preparing for a future we never actually arrive at. When we're young, we think, once I get that job, I'll be happy. Then it becomes, once I buy a house, then I'll finally feel secure. And later it's, once I retire, I'll finally relax. But here's the truth no one tells you. There is no finish line. There's no grand moment where everything falls perfectly into place. You either find peace where you are, or you spend your whole life chasing something that never really comes. I've seen people here who lived their entire lives waiting for the right time to be happy. They spent decades working, saving, planning, thinking that one day they'd finally enjoy life. But life doesn't wait. And now, they sit in their rooms, staring at old photographs, realizing that the years they spent waiting were the years they should have been living. Before we go any further, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And if this kind of conversation means something to you, a simple like or subscribe would be appreciated. Not for numbers, not for vanity, but because these lessons deserve to be shared. Another lesson I've learned in this place is that we don't actually own much in this world. We like to think we do. We spend our lives collecting things: cars, houses, clothes, jewelry. But when you come to a place like this, you realize how little of it actually matters. Most of what you thought was important will end up in boxes, sold off, or forgotten. I see it all the time. A lifetime of possessions, packed away in a few cardboard boxes. The things people once cherished, now collecting dust in some storage room or being picked over by distant relatives. And it makes you wonder, if the things we spend our lives accumulating don't stay with us, then what really matters? The answer is simple. People. The way you treat them. The way they remember you. That's all that's left in the end. Not the car you drove or the house you lived in, but the moments you created with the people who shared your life. And yet, so many of us spend more time worrying about material things than we do nurturing relationships. I've met people here who built their lives around money, only to realize too late that wealth can't buy love. I've also met people who had very little in terms of material wealth, but they are rich in another way, because their children still visit, their friends still call, and their laughter still echoes in the hallways. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that your true wealth is measured by the people who still care about you when you have nothing left to give. And then there's something else: regret. I don't care who you are, how successful you've been, or how good of a life you think you've lived. If you sit in a quiet room long enough, regret will find its way in. I've spent many afternoons sitting with people who have more years behind them than ahead, and you'd be surprised what weighs on their hearts. It's never about money. It's never about status. It's always about the people they loved, or the ones they didn't love enough. I've heard stories from people who lost touch with their children because of stubborn pride. People who never told their spouses how much they truly meant to them. People who let friendships fade because they were too busy with work. And now, all they have left are the what-ifs and if-onlys. And let me tell you, regret is heavier than any burden you'll ever carry. But here's the thing about regret. It's only useful if you're still willing to do something about it. If you're watching this, if you still have time, don't waste it. Call the people you've lost touch with. Forgive the ones who hurt you, if only to free yourself from the weight of holding on. Say what needs to be said while you still have the chance, because one day you won't. I've also learned that kindness costs nothing, but it means everything. The smallest gestures, a warm smile, a kind word, a simple act of patience can change someone's entire day. I've seen it happen. A nurse taking an extra moment to listen to an old man's story, even though she's busy. A visitor holding a frail hand a little longer before saying goodbye. These things seem small, but in a place like this, they mean the world. And yet, kindness is something many of us forget to practice. We're too caught up in our own struggles, our own stress, to notice when someone else needs a little compassion. But if there's one thing I can tell you with certainty, it's this. When you reach the end of your life, you won't regret being too kind. You won't wish you had been harsher or more indifferent. But you might regret the moments when you could have been gentler, more patient, more understanding. There's something about watching the sun set through the same window every evening that makes you think about life differently. It's not just another day ending, it's another day gone. And when you start counting time in days rather than years, you realize just how precious every single one of them is. I used to think of life in decades, what I'd do in my 40s, what I'd accomplish in my 50s, how I'd spend my 60s. But now, I think in moments, because that's all life really is, in the end, a collection of moments. And if you don't pay attention, they slip through your fingers before you even realize they were there. I see it all the time here. People looking back on their lives, realizing they spent too much time worrying about the wrong things. The bills, the deadlines, the things they thought were so urgent at the time. But ask anyone sitting in a place like this, and they'll tell you, most of what you worry about doesn't matter in the long run. Before we continue, I'd love to hear from you. What's something you've learned with age that you wish you had known sooner? And if these words speak to you, a simple like or subscribe would be deeply appreciated. Not for numbers, but because wisdom only matters when it's shared. One of the hardest truths I've had to accept is that you can't outrun time. When you're younger, you feel invincible. You think you'll always have another chance, another day, another opportunity. But you don't. And nothing reminds you of that more than watching people disappear one by one. You see, in a place like this, goodbyes are not rare. They are part of the routine. Someone you shared dinner with yesterday is suddenly gone today. Their chair is empty, their bed is made, their belongings quietly packed away. And just like that, a whole lifetime is over. I've learned that life is not as long as we think it is. We assume we have time to fix our mistakes, to make up for lost moments, to get around to the things we always said we'd do. But sometimes we don't. Sometimes time runs out before we're ready. I met a man here who spent his whole life working, always putting off happiness for later. Once I retire, he said, I'll finally enjoy myself. But by the time he got there, his body was failing him. The things he dreamed of doing, the trips, the hobbies, the adventures, were now out of reach. And the saddest part? He knew it. He knew he had waited too long. Don't make that mistake. If you have dreams, don't shelf them for a future that may never come. If you love someone, tell them now. If there's something you've always wanted to do, start today. Because waiting for the right time is just another way of letting life pass you by. And then there's loneliness. I won't lie to you, loneliness is one of the heaviest things a person can carry. And you don't truly understand it until you've sat in a room with nothing but your own thoughts for company. I've met people here who haven't had a visitor in years, people whose families got busy, whose friends moved on, whose calls stopped coming. And I'll tell you this, Being alone is not the same as being lonely. Some people are alone and at peace, but loneliness? Loneliness is when you still crave the presence of others, but no one comes. And if there's one thing I can say, it's this: don't let the people in your life feel forgotten. It doesn't take much. A call, a letter, a quick visit. You don't have to do anything grand. Just let them know they still matter. Because one day, you'll be in their place. And I promise you, you'll hope someone remembers you too. Another thing I've learned here is that your mind is just as important as your body. People think aging is just about wrinkles and gray hair, but that's not the real battle. The real battle is keeping your mind sharp, your spirit alive, your curiosity awake. I've met people here in their 90s who are still full of life. They read, they learn, they ask questions, they stay engaged in the world, even as their bodies slow down. And I've met others who gave up long before their time. People who stopped caring, stopped trying, stopped finding joy in the little things. And let me tell you, the difference is striking. If you want to live well, even in old age, don't let your world shrink too much. Keep learning. Keep talking to people of all ages. Keep finding reasons to laugh. Because once you stop being interested in life, life stops being interested in you. I've come to understand something about life that I never fully grasped before. Most of us are too busy living to actually notice that we are living. We move through our days thinking about the next thing, the next goal, the next stage. And then, one day, you look back and realize that life was happening all along. In the quiet moments, in the laughter that faded too quickly, in the hands you once held without thinking, in the people who were once always there but are now just memories. It's strange how memory works. Some things you forget, even though you swore you never would, and other things stay with you, clear as day, even after decades have passed. And I've learned that the things that stay are never the ones you expect. It's not the big achievements, not the promotions, not the possessions. It's the way your mother's voice sounded when she called you in for dinner, the way your child's hand felt in yours before they grew too old to reach for it, the way your best friend laughed at a joke only the two of you understood. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this, it's this: don't take those moments for granted. One day, they'll be all you have left. Before we go on, I want to ask, what's a memory that has stayed with you? Something small but meaningful. Share it in the comments. And if these conversations matter to you, if they make you think, a like and subscribe would mean a lot. Not for the numbers, but because these words deserve to reach the people who need them. Something else I've come to realize is that life, in its simplest form, is a series of goodbyes, and no one teaches you how to say them properly. You say goodbye to places, to moments, to people, often without realizing it's the last time. You leave your childhood home thinking you'll visit often, and then one day, it's gone. You hug a friend goodbye, expecting to see them again, and then life pulls you in different directions. You wake up next to someone for years, and then one day, their side of the bed is empty. We all go through life acting as if we have more time than we do, but we don't. That's the hardest lesson of all. I've met people here who would give anything for one more conversation with someone they lost, one more chance to say what they never said. And the saddest thing? Most of the time, it's not the big things left unsaid. It's the small ones. I miss you. I appreciate you. I love you. The things we assume people already know. So, if you take nothing else from my words, take this. Don't wait. Don't assume people know how you feel. Tell them. Show up. Be there. Because one day, you'll wish you had. And here's another truth. There's no such thing as the right time to do the things that matter. There's just time. And it runs out faster than you think. I've seen people put off happiness for later. They save the good dishes for special occasions. Wear the nice outfit only when there's an event. Wait for the perfect moment to take the trip, to start the hobby, to enjoy their lives. And then, one day, they wake up in a place like this, realizing that later never came. The perfect moment to be happy is not next year, not next month, not even tomorrow. It's now. Whatever you have, whoever you have, whatever little joys life has given you, appreciate them now. Use the good dishes on a regular Tuesday. Wear the nice outfit just because. Celebrate the small moments. Laugh often. Love loudly. Because the only thing worse than getting old is realizing you never truly lived. Another thing I've learned is that forgiveness is not something you do for others, it's something you do for yourself. I've met people here who still hold on to grudges from decades ago. And let me tell you, bitterness is a heavy thing to carry. It ages you. It steals your joy. And in the end, it changes nothing except the weight on your own heart. I'm not saying you have to forget what someone did to you. I'm not saying you have to let them back into your life. But I am saying that if you hold on to anger, if you keep replaying old wounds, you're the one who suffers. Life is too short to spend it carrying things that don't serve you. Let go. Not for them, for you. As I sit here, looking back on my life, I realized that the best things were always the simplest things. Sitting by the water, feeling the sun on my skin, a good conversation with an old friend, holding someone I love, even if just for a moment. That's what stays. That's what matters. And the truth is, we all end up in the same place. Rich or poor, famous or unknown, surrounded by family or completely alone, we all come to the end of our journey one day. And when that day comes, you won't be thinking about your bank account, or your career, or the things you owned. You'll be thinking about the people you loved, the people who loved you, the memories you made. So, if you're still here, if you still have time, make it count. Love well, forgive often, be present. Because one day, all of this, the worries, the stress, the things you think are so important right now, will be gone. And all that will remain is how well you lived and how deeply you loved. That's the final lesson these 2 months have taught me, and I hope, in some way, they help you too.